Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to As I Live and Grieve. Gosh, it seems like forever, but we all know that it's only a week in between episodes. We're so excited today with our guest. Our guest is Edy Nathan, and I'm going to say, welcome, Edy. Thanks for being here. And would you just kind of catch our listeners up and tell them a little bit about yourself?
The way I love to start is that I love to grapple with what's in our dark caves. And so often what's in our cave is our grief and our loss and our trauma. And what I love to do is help people find a way out of the cave.
Wow.
So I combine that with education. I've got a couple of master's degrees, and I've written a book called It's Grief, The Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. I'm in the process of writing another book, and my lens is a lens of grief, meaning what are we yearning for? What have we lost? And how do we get filled up again?
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that analogy of a cave.
Yeah.
I've been in a few caves, mainly the ones touted for tourism, Carlsbad. But a cave to me is unique. The last time I went down in one of these caves, actually, I thought I was on a Disney set, just because I guess Hollywood has gotten so good at recreating some of these scenarios that I had to stop and say, wait, is this real? But then as I touched the sides of the walls and everything like that, I realized that yes, indeed. But there is indeed so much of a cave that reminds me of grief. So again, thanks so much for being here today.
It's great to be here.
I have read most of your book, and I try to read, when we have a guest who's an author, I try to make sure to read their books as well, because it just tells me so much about that person. And one of the things I really appreciated is the fact that you talk about grief, but it is not necessarily restricted to the death of a loved one.
That's right.
It can be what we've talked about on occasion, any loss in your life. And with COVID and the pandemic, and knock on wood, we're now coming out of it, I think almost everybody in the world is holding some grief of one form or another. And also, can I just mention the people in the Ukraine? Talk about a place filled with grief. So, your book, one of the things I enjoyed about your book, and I found it first right in the table of contents, is you don't have 5 stages of grief. You don't have 6. As I recall, you have 11.
Phases.
11 phases of grief.
Yeah.
Why 11? What made you extend what most people have come to know as Kubler-Ross's version? What made you extend it and include these additional phases?
It's one of my favorite questions to answer.
Good.
And this is for really your whole listening audience. I love the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. When she created the 5 stages, they were for the dying. They were not for the grieving.
Oh,
Yes. And so those 5 stages were sacrosanct. You went for the dying, they went from denial, and they went through each of the stages until they got to acceptance. And that anger and the fight for their lives that they were losing. And these 5 stages were the stages for the dying, not necessarily for people who were surviving the loss of their loved ones. So I wanted to start with a different perspective because I see a stage as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And, grief is nonlinear. It doesn't follow a path. And there is no beginning, middle, and an end. And you know that. And I know it. And so I felt it was like giving the reader permission to see that they were going to be moving in and out of this, and that there was going to be a flexibility to how they grieved, what they were experiencing. And I saw the first phase as a place that they would continually go back to. And that first
Mhm.
phase is called the emotional armor phase. And
I love
it's a
that.
good place.
Yep. Yeah, I love that description. And in your table of contents, you mentioned numbness, hysteria, denial, and protest and shock. And true, you keep going back and back and back. But I didn't mean to interrupt. So go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm glad. Keep interrupting. This is an important conversation. The way that I see that first phase is that whatever phase you are tackling, whatever phase you meet, or the phases, let's say you're facing anger, but you're also facing guilt, and you're also facing shame, and then you're trying to figure out the forgiveness. As you get to a place within those phases, and they may all come in at once,
Mhm.
you may grapple with them back in the first phase, meaning it's your resting place. It's your place to break down, to shut down, to cut out, to deal with the next movement of your loss. And so I see that first phase as really the only phase that you continue to rest in. And it's a very, very important place for all of us who are grieving anything, at grieving anything.
Nice, nice, nice. And I also have to thank you for that little tidbit, which is our listeners couldn't see, but I was sitting here with my mouth open for a while when you mentioned that Kubler-Ross intended those stages of grief for people who are dying.
That's right.
And then reach finally that acceptance level. Why have I not heard that before now?
I don't know. I heard it.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, how did I miss it? Maybe I just
I don't-
wasn't catching it when it was said.
Maybe.
But that a light bulb just went on, and I thought, yes, that's true. That's why it doesn't necessarily fit
Yep.
with the grief journey that I personally am more familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
If I may just interject for just one moment, because the thing of beauty about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is she took a topic that nobody was talking about, and she got us talking about it.
Yes.
So it's not about making it wrong. It's about being extremely inclusive about this dynamic woman who gave us a platform from which we could operate when someone, a loved one, was going through those stages. And
Right.
that allowed me as an author to pivot and to discuss it from that point of view.
Right, right. Exactly. Later in your book, of course, you talk about one of the favorite topics that I like to chat on is moving forward, because so many people hear that initially as moving on.
Mm.
And there's a subtle distinction, but I really would love to hear your interpretation of the difference between moving on and moving forward.
So moving on feels like get on with it. And why don't you forget about this already and just
Right.
do your life?
Right.
As opposed to moving forward, which is you're not going to forget. How are you going to carry this?
Right, right. And it doesn't matter if it's even one tiny little baby step, one almost infinitesimal
That's right.
piece of progress. You're still moving forward.
Yep.
That's right.
But it's true. So many people that are grieving here, get over it.
Yeah.
Which, AKA, move on. And that's not what we should seek to do. We should seek to keep moving forward.
And you're going to move forward, and then you're going to go back, and you're going to move forward,
Right.
and then you're going to go back. And that's
Right.
okay, because that's also the brain trying to figure out, how am I going to live in this world
Right.
without my loved one? Or how am I
Yes.
going to live in this world? You mentioned Ukraine, without my home. How am I
Right.
going to live in this world when it felt safe and it no longer feels safe? So there's a
Exactly.
lot of parameters here of
Right.
grief, and how the platform of grief is ever present through the many different losses that we're experiencing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We all know that grief is painful. It can be devastating, excruciating at times. One of your topics that you speak freely on is converting the pain of your loss, whether it's a death or whether it's a loss of lifestyle, loss of job, loss of a marriage, whatever it is, converting the pain of that loss to personal growth.
Yeah. This is what I want to hear.
I know. We are waiting with bated breath, Edie. Can you help us out?
Stephanie,
Yeah.
why do you want to hear it?
Because it not necessarily related to grief, but my anxiety that when I was younger, I didn't realize it was anxiety. And I feel I have come a long way in my life. And maybe I do have grief from some anxiety. But so I'm all about that personal growth because I've come so far from 20 years ago, even. And so just being able to move forward and just be better for myself, which then helps those around me, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Because that's exactly what it's about.
Okay.
It's about knowing the self. And when you get a sense of who you are, and there's nothing like grief to be a teacher.
Right.
Grief is one of your greatest teachers. It can also be an ally. And the ally part shows up when you start to understand who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have to face parts of you that you didn't want to meet,
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to have anything to do with,
Mm-hmm.
shied away from, and yet beginning to go on the journey of self-discovery because you've met grief along your path is a gift. And the book describes the many ways you can assess what will help you in learning more about you.
Okay.
Should I go on?
Yes.
Keep going. Don't
Okay.
stop now.
So there's the idea of being able to say, am I an extrovert, an introvert, or an ambivert, which is a little bit of both? Because if you are an ambivert and a little bit of both, then there are going to be times when you're going to act like an extrovert or like an introvert. Based on where you are, and we're all probably a little bit of everything, but sometimes we're a little bit more of one of those areas, personality kind of establishments, that then you know what's going to best help you. For example, if someone is an extrovert, probably doing just one type of therapy or being alone in a room isn't going to work.
Right.
If you're an introvert, maybe one-on-one therapy would be far better than thinking you're going to join a group.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The book takes you through the different aspects of the self, even just looking at those three pieces. Another way of looking at the personality is, are you fixed? Are you mutable? Are you cardinal? So if you imagine that there's this boulder, the fixed personality, and the boulder is in the middle of the road, the fixed personality will go and take a chisel and start going at the boulder until the boulder breaks and they're able to go. The mutable will say, oh, I'm going to come right back and gather people, strangers, animals, and say, come on, help me with the boulder. The cardinal will climb the boulder and say, I've got this. And again, it's like there's no right or wrong here. However, based on those particular personalities, that again, it will help you determine what kind of help do you need. Do you need a group? Do you need a community? Or do you feel like, I need to go more internally? I need to read. I need to chat with a few folks. Or do you think that you've got this? And maybe you've got it for right now, and that's more the cardinal, and you'll deal with it in your way. And a group might not be the right place for you, nor one-on-one therapy. Maybe you just need to figure it out all on your own. And that's great if you can.
And before you try to decide what you are, do you have to determine what specifically you're grieving? Or do you have to identify a specific item and say, this is what I need help with? Or can you just move forward and at some point know that those items that need attention will come to the surface? Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I want to say yes to all of your queries.
Okay.
Yes, you might need to know. Yes, it will come to the surface. Yes, you might need to do some self-exploration to figure out what it is you're grieving. When people come in to see me, the first thing I'm thinking about is what are they yearning for and what are they missing?
Okay.
I don't want to know their stories yet. I just want to know what are
Okay.
you yearning for and what are you missing?
Okay, that's interesting. And then I suppose likewise, it's possible and maybe even very likely that you will start out thinking, okay, I lost this person who's very important in my life, and that's what I need help with. And then as you work on yourself, you may find something else kind of pop up and say, hey, you need help with this too.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
You are so right. Yeah, you really said that so eloquently because that's exactly right.
Thank you.
When you begin to deal with one aspect of your grief, often the way that you are processing will bring up other losses that you may not have even realized were affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be as strange as a pet you lost when you were young,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be a grandparent you never had a chance to say goodbye to. Or
Right.
it could be that a parent didn't die, but they were ill during your childhood. And so you
Mm-hmm.
lost some of that parenting and nurturing that you so desperately needed. And that
Right.
when you are facing the magnitude of the loss of a loved one, you then start to rumble with these other parts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, how do you, with your training, how do you facilitate or guide someone as they start working on things like this? And I know in your book you have a toolkit, but I'm sure that for your sessions, the one-on-one sessions in particular, you have some other tools and resources. How do you help somebody when we all know that everybody's grief is different? The topic is different. Their personalities are different. It's like our fingerprints. So, how does someone like yourself be able to help somebody like that with all of the differences there might be?
The Japanese have a beautiful Buddhist term. It is Shoshin, and it means a beginner's mind.
Okay.
When I
Shoshin.
work with clients, I have the beginner's mind, the mindset of what will work for them may not work for anybody else. I need
Okay.
to be on their page. I need to listen very carefully. I understand that grief is a hostage taker, and
Mm.
grief loves to hold you hostage. I utilize 6 hostage negotiation techniques to
Oh,
actually bring out the ability for the client to tangle with the hostage taker.
interesting. Very interesting. That's very intriguing. I'm pondering. I'm not stuck. I'm just pondering. There's so much more insight that you've given me just in these few moments that I've not had before. And I'm a thinker, I'm a reader, I like to do some research and everything like that. So now I'm kind of going off in another segue, thinking maybe I should try this or maybe I should try this. Very good.
It's about having options. So it's the hostage taker option. It's utilizing something called EMDR for trauma because grief is also traumatizing. It's using
Yes.
hypnosis. It's using play therapy.
Okay.
I will find myself sitting on the floor with clients. It's harder with Zoom, but I will say, "Come on, let's get onto the floor," and somebody's on their floor and
Mhm.
I'm on mine.
Mhm.
And that is it's finding the language of the person who's grieving and being with them in that language.
Is that something you can manage to do like in the first session to figure out what approach you might need with them?
It depends on the person.
Mm.
You
Okay.
know, we're very guarded with our grief.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm really not interested in hearing the story initially, which shocks most people. It's like,
Right.
don't tell me your story. Let's just sit here. Because too often people share their stories. Maybe they've been uneasy. Maybe they've shared too much. They don't return or they get scared. And it seems that really trust needs to be developed and a sense of safety. And I've learned, my peeps, my clients have taught me, I need to allow for the trust to build, maybe before some of the story is told.
Mm-hmm.
I find that fascinating because I know the first time I related to someone the portion of my husband's death, I was with him when he died, and the first time I related it was very, very emotional for me. Each time I relate the same story, it's a little less emotional. So when you say that you're not interested in the story initially, I like that because probably by now I've told the same story 100 times or more. And it's almost like a shield now. I'm very comfortable in the telling because I don't have to worry about it impacting me anymore.
You are so right, Kathy. And then there's no emotions. You're
Exactly.
telling me
So
a
that gives you
story.
nothing to go on.
Mm.
It gives you
Right.
nothing to go on. Oh, I like that approach. I really do. Interesting. You mentioned EMDR. I'm an insatiable curiosity person. What does that stand for?
Eye movement, desensitization, and restructuring.
Oh,
It is really about changing the way the brain holds on to trauma or grief.
okay. Huh.
It is a technique that was developed in the 80s and uses eye movement, yes, also uses tapping, and
Right.
it's a cognitive interrupter and a cognitive reorganizer.
Okay.
The survivors of the Oklahoma City bombing,
Mm-hmm.
EMDR specialists were sent down to the area to help these folks. Anywhere
Oh.
where there's a war zone,
Mm-hmm.
EMDR is one of the first go-tos to help people
Okay.
cope with their trauma.
Yeah. Interesting. I imagine a lot of veterans out there could use that too with their PTSD.
And they do,
Um,
and they do use it. They do use it with veterans. They use it
yeah.
with trauma survivors. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Quickly, I'd like to hear about the second book that you're working on. Can you tell us anything about it?
Sure. It's the title, the working title. So don't, the no
Right.
promises here, okay? The
Right.
working title is Sexual Grief and the Human
Oh,
Condition.
really?
And it is the idea that we experience with sexual trauma a sexual grief that has never been talked about.
Hmm.
And it is a framework that I've coined. And if we think about the lifeline of a person, just all of the different developmental places that we land, that there are the big griefs, the big G's and the little G's,
Mm-hmm.
and that they can create little traumas in us that actually affect our senses of self. And
Oh,
and and
yeah.
it can be a big trauma, but when I think of sexual trauma, I'm kind of redefining some of the way that we talk about it. And
Mm-hmm.
when oftentimes when someone has the loss of they're dealing with the loss of a loved one, they then will often go into some form of sexual grief as well, the touch, the loss of touch. I'm not talking about sexual touch per se, but intimacy.
Right.
And no one really talks about that. And then, of course, there's all of the developmental areas that we get stuck. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's how does that again hold you hostage? And it is understanding that we can often get ambushed by memories. We can get
Mm-hmm.
ambushed by the pain. And it's about learning how to deal with that power and breaking through it.
Hmm.
Interesting. And when is that scheduled to hit the shelves? Is there a date yet?
Sometime at the end of 2023.
Excellent. Excellent.
Mm.
That's wonderful. Okay, now a favorite question of mine. It's so difficult when you have a friend who is grieving. Sometimes we compare it to ourselves and think, what we found that helped us. And we are always such helpful people. We want to give all of the advice we can to people. The big question for me is there a way we can tell when somebody really should seek out some professional help? Are there indicators? Or is it a flat statement that everybody that's going through something traumatic as grief really could benefit from seeing a professional?
Yes, and people are different.
Yes.
The needs of one person does not necessarily match the needs of another. It's not for me or anyone, I believe, to say to someone, oh, well, you just lost someone and now you need to go get help, because they may not be ready and they may do it in their own time, not in your time.
Okay.
And healing doesn't take place in the time that we want somebody to heal, because their healing is not about us. It's about them. With that said, are there danger signs? Sure. And there are times when intervention is needed. If you can't contact that person and you're used to being in touch with them, if when you see them, you notice they haven't showered, you notice that they're wearing clothes that are dirty or inappropriate for the weather or the year, they haven't gone to work, or you see that they've lost a tremendous amount of weight or gained a tremendous amount of weight. They seem like they haven't slept, or all they're doing is sleeping. They are have an inability to even reach out for the smallest thing. But this is over. This is not the first week, the second week. We're talking
Right.
6 months,
Okay.
and that doesn't mean that there can't be suicidality early on.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
drinking too much, they're smoking too much, they're drugging, and you notice that they are self-medicating. Those are danger signals, and that's
Okay.
when they need a conscious interrupter, like a friend or family member, to help them get help.
Okay. Is it fair to summarize that and say it's the extremes, the extreme differences from the person you know?
Yep,
Is
that's it.
that fair?
That's
Okay.
fair. I just like to be specific rather
I
than,
agree. I agree. I
Mhm.
agree completely. Absolutely. And that's very, very helpful. Okay, Edie, sadly, our time is winding up for the day. But before we sign off, we always like to give our guests a few moments to speak directly to our listeners. Tell them about your website, the services you offer. I'd say tell them about your new book, but I already got that out of you. Tell them anything you would like to about yourself and how you might be able to help people that are listening.
the way that you can get in touch with me is through my website, edynathan.com. And you can read articles that I've written on Psychology Today and Medium. They're free, don't cost a thing, and they really cover a variety of topics. Everyone at some point in their lives ends up in a cave. Your cave is personal to you. I am a fan of The Wizard of Oz, and The Wizard of Oz is a true Shiro hero journey. And she meets the different parts of herself that she must develop. And she meets them through the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion and even the Wizard and even the Wicked Witch and even Glinda the Good Witch.
Mhm.
The thing is that at the very beginning of the story, she is given the shoes. In the book, they're actually gray, not red, but I think Hollywood needed to make them red. So
Exactly.
whatever color they need to be for you, let them be that. But understand that Dorothy, like you hold the power to heal, and it's yours.
Mm, that.
Beautifully
Yeah.
said. Beautifully said. I like that very, very much. Okay, listeners, it's that time. We have to wrap things up. So we want to say, we hope that today brought you a little piece of information that may offer you comfort, maybe another little piece of information that might spur you to take activity so that you can move forward a little bit more in your grief journey. Remember that we're here. We're going through it too. Look around you. I think almost everybody in the world is on a grief journey of one type or another. We used to laugh and say we all need t-shirts that say, "Be kind to me, I'm grieving." But in truth, I think most people are grieving some loss in their life. Remember to take care of yourselves and tune in again next week. Thanks for listening, and take care as we all continue to live in grief.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveinGrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.